I see people already starting to say hello in the chat box, which is great. Perry, you want me to go ahead and get us started?
Yeah, we're at noon, so let's kick it off.
Wonderful,
We've
great.
got a good group.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Bridget Blum Ramsey, the President and CEO of the Pritchard Committee, and I want to welcome you to the second week of our annual meeting, online, virtual, entitled Education Excellence and Equity in a Changing World. Today's Lunch and Learn will discuss the continued importance of early childhood. What is kindergarten readiness, and how do we all make sure our youngest are prepared? And we'll talk about childcare trends amidst COVID with special guests today. Today's session is part of a series of virtual events that we started last week, and we have them continuing this week. In the chat box, you'll find a link to our webpage where you can register for additional meetings through this Friday, including implicit bias and cultural competency training tomorrow morning, and a conversation with Dr. George Wright about racial equity and justice tomorrow evening. All of these will be streamed live, or actually tomorrow evening will be streamed live on Facebook and on YouTube. So please check out the webpage for more information. And please note we are live streaming today's session on YouTube to easily archive the discussion. And we encourage you, as so many already have, to use the chat box to post your comments and questions as we go through today's discussion, and even to say hello to each other as we get to know each other the only way we can these days, virtually. Also in the chat box, you'll find a link to a survey with questions about the needs in education. We'll be using the results of this survey to populate the Pritchard Committee's next multi-year strategic plan. So I encourage you, if you haven't already, to fill out the survey so we can incorporate your voice and your thoughts into our planning. Without further ado, I'm pleased to turn over today's conversation to Perry Papka, our Deputy Director for Policy and Research, to get us started. Perry?
Thank you, Bridget, and welcome everybody on this Monday to our discussion about access to childcare and early learning opportunities. We're glad you all were able to take time to discuss this important issue, and we are glad and appreciative today to have two of our partners in early childhood advocacy, part of our Strong Start Early Learning Coalition, and really powerhouses around the state in the early childhood space. June Widman, who's Executive Director of the Appalachia Early Childhood Network, and Don Thompson, who's the Assistant Director of Community Coordinated Childcare in Louisville, otherwise known as 4C. We're grateful to have them here today and to participate in our discussion. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and go through some high-level information with you all to sort of set the stage for our discussion today. Get this all set up. And as Bridget said, we encourage you to use the chat box to post questions, ideas, how you're feeling about the issue, whatever you desire. We'll also open it up for Q&A with Dawn and June as we get through this. As Bridget said, hello. Get my screen to advance here. There we go. As Bridget said, we do have a survey that was linked in the chat box to help us create our next strategic plan. These slides will be available on our website afterwards. You can always go there at your leisure, click on the link, take the survey as you want. So if you miss it in the chat box, it'll still be available on the web. So to kick off our discussion today, I want to start with this big data snapshot. As part of our top 20 by 2020 tracking that we've done since 2008, we've been watching preschool enrollment of children ages 3 and 4 over the last number of years. And you can see that Kentucky has lost ground over the last decade in the percentage of young children enrolled in school. And this is all school, private childcare, Head Start, public preschool. We've dropped to 39th in the country from 24th. and this does not address infants and toddlers. So this is just school-age children, but it's an indicator of where we are relative to other states, but also with our own efforts to make sure that kids get off to the start they need. So I just wanted to present this to sort of set the tone that we're really in a state where we really need to provide focused effort to turn back the corner. And this is pre-COVID. So COVID notwithstanding, we needed to turn the corner and get moving in the right direction. So why is this important? I think many of you on the call today probably know this already, but access to early learning opportunities, high quality early learning opportunities impact children's learning, their family's ability to work, and it has a huge return on investment. So these opportunities really promote healthy brain development in the earliest years. 85%, the neuroscience says 85% of brain development happens before the age of 5. And importantly, gaps in achievement begin to appear as early as 18 months. And this really promotes learning that builds the foundation for future success. So kids get off to a strong start. They're off to a strong start for their entire school career. High quality early learning opportunities also help families enter and stay in the workforce. The National Survey of Children's Health, again, this is pre-COVID, 13.6% of Kentucky families report job insecurity due to lack of childcare. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation estimates that the lack of childcare costs employers over $3 billion annually. At a high level, the return on investment's great. Some estimates are $5 for every $1 invested in public and private benefits. This is on the low side. Some estimates are as high as $16 to 1. Higher income and education attainment, less crime, better health outcomes, less reliance on public assistance, all accrue to children and families being able to participate in high quality early learning opportunities. So at the Pritchard Committee, we often focus on school readiness. And what does that mean? Well, as I just said, high quality early learning opportunities really get kids off to a strong start to be ready to learn in school when they enter kindergarten. In Kentucky, we measure this through our kindergarten readiness screener. This is an infographic that displays in really easy terms how you can interpret what we mean by school readiness. The center graphic shows the 5 domains that children are assessed in. General knowledge, approaches to learning, language and communication development. Those are what make up our kindergarten readiness statistic in Kentucky. And then parents also report on health and physical well-being and social and emotional development. The bullets to each side of the infographic explain what those mean. So for instance, in approaches to learning, you can see it assesses the child is curious, do they focus, do they continue on task, do they play well in groups? And so if you do have a young child or you're having a conversation with people in your community about this, this is really helpful to ground you in what school readiness means. The Governor's Office of Early Childhood has a great resource page that provides parent guides and community guides and school readiness guides across age groups. So from 0 to 3-year-olds and and at the preschool age. And we'll provide links to that in the chat. So where does Kentucky stand in their kindergarten readiness? We're persistently right at about 50%. So on the very far left of this graph, you can see the all students. In 2019, 51.1% of all students tested as ready for kindergarten. Across the chart, you can see different groups of students and where gaps may appear. You can see that for different minority groups, those readiness rates are lower, as well as for students of low income and students with identified disabilities and English language learners. I didn't present a trend chart here, but suffice it to say, over the last 5 years, the all student statistic has hovered around 50%. So we haven't made a whole lot of progress on our kindergarten readiness rates in Kentucky. This presents why that matters for the future of that child's learning. This is a chart that describes the correlation between kindergarten readiness and their third grade proficiency in reading. So in this case, you can see on the left side of the chart, the purple colors show the student's kindergarten readiness rate. So the dark purple is ready or ready with enrichments. Those are both ready. They were ready for kindergarten. The light purple means they didn't score ready for kindergarten. And you can cross that over to the right side of the chart, which shows their scores in third grade reading 4 years later. So you can see where those students that were ready were much more likely to score proficient or distinguished in third grade reading. So it's important we tie these things together. High quality early learning opportunities lead to higher school readiness rates, which lead to a greater chance of success in third grade and beyond. So today we really wanted to tie this back to a discussion about childcare, which I'm sure many of you have followed in the news, have seen in the news during this crisis of COVID-19, that our childcare system has had significant challenges. But we wanted to start today by showing you that these challenges existed before the pandemic began. This chart displays the number of regulated childcare providers in Kentucky, and it's declined since 2013. It dropped almost 50% between 2013 and 2019. That's a significant decline. And as we think about how we provide access to parents and families and young children with the kind of quality early learning opportunities they need, I think this should raise the hairs on your arm a little bit. You know, what is going on here that we need to do differently to turn the corner? So again, this is prior to the pandemic. Our system was already fragile and was suffering a great decline in providers. I wanted to share on this slide too, the Kentucky by the numbers as the pandemic started. So right before the pandemic started, the state of childcare in Kentucky was that we had 165,000 childcare slots available. 28,000 children received childcare assistance. That meant they were eligible for public assistance to pay for childcare. 17% of our total capacity went to children receiving assistance, while 83% were funded by parents and families only. And we had, as of 2020, an even further drop. So only just under 2,200, 2,172 providers right before COVID-19 hit. So how does this look across the state? This is a scale of childcare deserts by county in Kentucky. So this map addresses the ratio of the number of children in a given county to the number of slots, childcare slots available. Simply put, everywhere a 1 appears on the map, there is 1 available slot for as many as 3 children in need of care. Where a 3 appears on the map, more than 8 children are vying for 1 available slot in a childcare facility. So the darker the color, the bigger the childcare desert. So this is another way of showing the impact of the decline in providers. There's some great resources on our blog about childcare deserts. I'll also get those posted in the chat where you can see this. The Center for American Progress has a great interactive website where you can look in greater detail about childcare deserts in your community. This chart describes data from a 2017 cost of quality report on childcare that the Pritchard Committee did that shows that, again, pre-pandemic, our support for childcare in Kentucky was already insufficient to provide quality full day care for enough working families. This chart is specific to the childcare assistance we provide for infants and toddlers. The blue line is the estimate of the daily cost for quality at different levels of quality. The yellow line is our current childcare assistance subsidy rate. And you can see that even at the lowest level of quality, level 1, which is the minimum, meeting minimum regulations, the subsidy for infants and toddlers was below the cost of quality. Moving all the way up to number 5, you can see that gap grow and grow and grow. Childcare, especially for infants and toddlers, can be expensive. As I mentioned in earlier slides, the return on investment is great, it's important, and we must try to do better. I want to show you now a little bit about what those levels of quality mean, so you have an idea about what we built into these estimates. Some of that information has been surprising, so I like to share it. So here in this table, you can see the different levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of quality, and the different high-level assumptions that were made in our analysis. Level 1, again, is meeting minimum regulations. The main cost drivers are generally class size. I wanted to draw your attention to the wage scales. This has been surprising. We've made this presentation to a number of chambers of commerce across Kentucky the last few years, and this has always stood out in those presentations. So even at the highest level of quality, the lead teacher hourly wage that was assumed was really just over $10 an hour. In today's labor market, I don't think that any of us would imagine that that's sufficient, nor would you, I think, imagine that your lead teacher in the child care facility where you're sending your children should make that wage. I know I have a 1 and 3-year-old, pre-pandemic at least, when we had a babysitter who was often our child care teacher, we paid them more than they made at the school. And in a market where people increasingly have opportunities to make $12, $15, $18 an hour, this is difficult. Staffing, we hear from providers, is often the number one concern. I know in our child care provider that we send our children to, staff turnover was a constant problem. So I just wanted to point this out, that even when we were showing you the cost of quality and that gap at level 5, that gap still only assumed this wage rate. So again, pre-pandemic, we were already under investing in childcare in Kentucky to provide the high quality early learning opportunities that we want for all young Kentuckians. So as the pandemic started, ourselves with a number of partners, which you can see listed on the bottom right infographic, we're having weekly conversations about what we could do to try to help advocate for childcare and to ensure that this workforce behind the workforce, as we like to call it sometimes, could sustain through the pandemic and be robust on the other side when we started to come out of our national emergency. We thought that there was a lot of national surveys going around. We thought some Kentucky information would be valuable. So with the assistance with a lot of partners, including the Division of Child Care at the state, we were able to do 2 different surveys, one of providers and one of parents and families, to try to gauge where people were, how they were being impacted by the pandemic, especially since in Kentucky, there was a mandated closure of childcare facilities in March. That closure, as most of you probably know, was lifted in mid-June, but the effects were substantial. So some high-level results from both of these surveys. Parents and families, which we completed in July on the left of this slide, almost 30% of, we surveyed over 1,500 parents and families. Almost 30% reported struggling to find childcare. Almost half were unsure, will not, or delaying sending their children back to the childcare setting they were in prior to the pandemic. People's largest concerns, not surprisingly, was the health and safety of their children, but also of family members. We face this as a family. So if we send our children back to childcare, are we going to thereby limit our ability to see their grandparents? That's a real consideration for people. Almost all respondents, 92%, said they supported more government to support to help providers meet new requirements and guidelines. So substantial support out there for more financial support for childcare. On our provider survey, which we completed at the end of May and the beginning of June, and we think we're probably going to do another one of these to get people's feelings about how they're continuing to be impacted. Up to 15% of providers responded that they may close permanently due to the COVID-19 crisis. I think recent numbers from the Division of Child Care shows that we're close to 10% that are still permanently closed. There's some changes coming this week, I think, that may impact that further as some supports from the original Stimulus Act start to phase out. Providers may face more challenges. 2/3 of providers had to lay off staff and had employees that relied on unemployment insurance during the closure period. And the majority of providers, for a variety of reasons, either did not or could not participate in the stimulus programs through the Small Business Administration. This all led us to the notion that we needed to, along with many other national partners and state partners across the country, call on Congress to support childcare specifically and directly now. This call to action was current in March, April, May, June, and it's current now. We still have not seen the level of support from Congress that is necessary. This is the point where I tell you to click on the link and tell Congress to pass a stimulus package that will support childcare sufficiently and directly. This is critically important to support the childcare workforce, our childcare businesses, and to ensure that families, parents, and children have the childcare they need now, but that also we have a childcare system that is robust and sustainable coming out of this national emergency. If we lose a lot of providers now, they may not come back, and that's going to be particularly problematic. I'm going to stop there for the moment. I wanted to also mention as a I guess a personal point about what you might be able to do in your community to support childcare. I think it's important, before I talk about the links here and then start our discussion with June and Dawn, that if you're a community leader or a parent or on your Chamber of Commerce, wherever you're engaged in your community, if childcare is not a priority, if it's not on the agenda, consider making it a priority or putting it on the agenda, even if it's just to discuss how people understand it. Do you have a childcare map in your community? Do you know where those resources exist? Have you talked to a provider recently? It just needs to be on the agenda. If you're doing an economic development strategy for your community, if you're thinking about how your community's quality of life can be better, childcare should be on the agenda. Here are some resources and links that we'll make sure are in the chat in addition to some other things. again, like I said, the Governor's Office of Early Childhood has some great resources and toolkits for parents and communities around school readiness. Um, our surveys that I mentioned are up and available online on a dedicated website, childcarekentucky.com. The Kentucky Center for Statistics has great early childhood profiles, so you can go directly to your community, see what your school readiness rate is, see what childcare providers exist in your community. It's a great tool. If you have not looked at them, I would highly suggest it. In addition to that, the Pritchard Committee has community profiles for all 173 school districts, 172 now school districts in Kentucky that detail the education, economic, and quality of life outcomes for Kentucky counties. These are helpful tools if you're engaging in community conversations. We encourage you to check them out, as well as to join the Pritchard Committee's Groundswell Initiative, which will sign you up for more information, connect you with other members that are engaged and interested in the issues you care about, and will allow us to connect with you to share resources that help you take action at the local level. So I'm going to stop my share screen now, and hopefully I didn't miss too much in the chat because I couldn't quite see everything. Oops. And start our discussion with June and Dawn. So again, we're grateful to have June and Dawn with us today to engage in this discussion. And I'll kick it to you first, June, to talk about your perspective on the number one challenges, current and existing, that you feel childcare is facing in your region. And maybe with your background too, you could talk a little bit more, which I didn't talk about so much, how family childcare can play a role in helping us address this critical issue.
Sure. Thank you, Perry. That was a great overview of kind of the underpinnings of the importance of early care and education. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm June Widman with the Appalachian Early Childhood Network. Our mission is to build an environment that supports quality, affordable care and education for all families in Appalachia. We grew out of my work with the Eastern Kentucky Child Care Coalition, which was founded in 1990 with similar purpose, but our focus was really childcare. And over the years, what we saw was the kinds of services we offered, particularly with training and technical assistance, began to spread into the other silos of Head Start and preschool settings. And so we decided it was time to kind of refresh and redo. And as a way of assuring that we have advocates still representing our region, we created this new organization, which will usher me out after being in the field of early care and education since arriving in Kentucky in 1982. So just a couple of points of perspective. You know, when Perry talked about the importance of brain development, I think something to keep in mind is that children are learning from birth. So no matter what environment they're in, they're learning. It's the what they are learning that's far more critical to their future than where they are learning it. So I think that's where childcare fits into this discussion, because that's one of those environments that so many children in Kentucky will find themselves in during their early years. The second point about school readiness, that slide that Perry showed with the different domains, I think highlights the importance that learning is taking place in each of those domains, and that how we address that is critical again to children's future success. So while we over the years have focused on a particular area of learning, what we have to keep in mind is that all of those things, including the health of the children, including their social development, all of those things are critical to them moving forward and fulfilling their own promises. So if we, look at, if we just sector out the childcare environment, we, need to think about what governs or shapes that environment now, and where did it come from? Just what do we mean by childcare anyway? When you think back years and years ago, to me, it doesn't seem all that long ago, but to some of you, you weren't even born then. So up until 1992, there was one type of childcare, really, it was licensed care. And what determined whether you needed to have a license to take care of children was a basic statute that just stipulates if you're going to care for more than three unrelated children, so not related to you, no matter where you're caring for them, whether it's in your home or in a center, you have to be licensed. And the basic standards around licensing were health and safety. We needed to assure that if somebody was going to charge money to care for children, that they had a basic assurance of health and safety for those kids. And as that developed, and as we over time, got new information about what is good for kids, that sort of realm of health and safety kept growing and growing, which meant more regulations around how we should be caring for children. One of the things, as Perry mentioned, was that, there was already issues around supply for childcare in our region. The rural parts of the Commonwealth were more greatly impacted by the fact that childcare as a business was beginning to cost more than what parents could afford to pay. Now, there's a wonderful history of support from churches and from nonprofit organizations that did what they could to assist the childcare supply. So, oftentimes we would see churches doubling up on their space and allowing it to be used for childcare during the week and then used by their own needs on the weekends. That was not uncommon. But then again, as regulations began to increase, as we learned different things about what is best for children, it got harder and harder to use those dual spaces and to make childcare work. So early in the 90s, a group of folks who had been looking for ways to expand regulated childcare in the region to offer more options for parents, we looked at the fact that licensed childcare at the time also included if you wanted to do it in your home. Now, you were limited to a maximum of 12 children, but pretty much the regulations, well, they were not all that different. There were a few differences among, what was needed educationally, but basically all the rules applied. So whether you were in a center or whether you were in a home. And consequently, there were not a lot of family childcare homes in Kentucky when that was the only option. So folks got together and talked about the idea of another layer of regulation that might accommodate a small family childcare home and work better in places where populations were less dense and where other needs that couldn't be met by a childcare center could take place. And so in 1992, certification of family childcare homes that could care for up to 6 unrelated children in the provider's home came into being. That, again, specifically helped in rural areas because of that, what I mentioned, the less dense population made it harder to get that critical mass that could help a center stay in business. But soon what became evident was that even centers that could muster, the gathering of 100 children together to try and make childcare pay for itself, we're finding that the increased cost of doing business were outweighing what parents were earning in communities, and they could not afford to pay a decent salary to the people caring for their children, let alone all the other expenses that are associated with that. If you remember the chart that Perry pointed out in terms of the cost of quality, versus what the state was paying in terms of those who qualified for child care assistance, there was that line at about $28, $27, something like that for infant toddler care. There are 5 counties in the state who are only receiving $20 a day for infant toddler care. So that same gap is there, only it has grown exponentially. And again, makes it difficult for quality to be an important factor when folks are trying to provide this service. So as that cost of running a center outpaced what folks could pay, family childcare did grow. And in fact, in 2005, it peaked around just over 1,200 small certified homes throughout the Commonwealth. And those homes were meeting a variety of needs. The problem is that when at some point the state decided that those certified homes, which had been, they were brought about because there was real attention paid to them. There were specific people in Frankfort who only visited those homes for quality assurance, for regulatory purposes. There were folks that were trained to understand what does childcare look like in a person's home versus in a center. So when they went to see that all the regulations were met, they understood that they were in a person's home and that person was choosing to run a business of caring for children. Okay, so they had that perspective, they brought it with them, there was a lot of support around it. Eventually, again, as cost saving issues came about, those folks were folded into the rest of the regulatory system for childcare. So a person might be visiting a center one day to make sure all the regulations were met, and then the next day they're out in a home. And they had to make those switches, which didn't always happen. Okay, so many times that the expectations walking into a person's home were the same as if they were in that center from yesterday. So support began to dwindle for the idea of family childcare. It got harder and harder. The regs got increasingly more difficult. Issues about zoning, all different things kind of came along that impacted who might be interested in starting a family childcare home. And so we saw as the women who were running these small businesses, as they began to retire, as they began to think I can't do this anymore, there's too many things on me to expect to meet, I just can't do it. As they were leaving the field, no new people were coming in, or very few at best. And that number dwindled down to below, and again, pre-COVID, less than 250 small family certified home businesses in the entire Commonwealth. So from 1,200 down to less than 250. And I would submit that if that was any other industry, there would have been alarm bells ringing all over the place. But what happened with that decline is that family childcare as even a thing, as a known business, dropped off of our radar. And so if a parent doesn't know that there's such a thing as a certified home when they're looking for options for their own children, if they don't know it exists, they can't look for it. And so consequently, they turn to the only other option that they had in regions where childcare centers had closed and just couldn't make it. And that was to turn to family, friends, or neighbors, which is unregulated care. Now, just kind of loop that back around to what I said at the beginning in terms of children are going to learn in any environment they're in. And it's the what they're learning versus the where. When we have places where folks are dedicated to the idea of providing children with whatever developmentally appropriate stimuli they can muster for a child that age, versus someone who is concerned about the safety of the child, but basically is going to go about their business, and the TV or television or computer becomes the child care provider instead. That the what that's going into child's brains might be less than what we want to see, and certainly less than what will help for the potential of that child. So along with the regulation of childcare and the growth and then the decline, it has been 20 years since the introduction of the Kids Now legislation, which really highlighted the importance of the quality of that care. We were able to outline, what does that look like? What is quality? What are we talking about? Fine tune it and turn it into a quality rating system, and really give folks a way of understanding whether or not they are providing quality care. And I'll stop there so that we can get Dawn's perspective on the same thing.
Sure. Dawn, I guess, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I guess a similar question to you, and I'll pose while we do that. You know, current challenges, current existing challenges you're seeing, I guess, particularly in Louisville around provision of childcare, but also we had a question that you might be able to think about in the chat related to from Sherry Grinnell about the potential for business partnerships and incentives, and whether you're seeing any creative ideas in that space in your area.
Sure. So I just have to say, I've had the privilege of speaking with June 2 or 3 times over the last couple of weeks, and I'm telling you, I learn something new every single time. I'm just in awe of everything that she knows and the history that she has. So I'm telling you, June, you could continue speaking, and I would not be upset at all. I love hearing you speak. So Louisville, the urban areas in particular, but especially Louisville, have faced the same challenges. We don't necessarily have the childcare deserts per se that the rural areas face, although we do have some areas, you know, even in Louisville, while we have, you know, we have availability of childcare, we do have some areas that don't have the exact access to childcare that they should have. And you know, that's an equity issue. If you don't have access to childcare, that's definitely an equity issue. And there are areas in Louisville that don't have the amount of childcare that they should have. But the challenges that we face are similar to what childcare providers across the state are facing. Low enrollments, parents are stressed. We saw that in the survey that the Pritchard Committee did with parents. They're stressed if their children are attending childcare, if their children are not attending childcare, for various reasons. Because if they're not attending, they're stressed about, are they going to find childcare? When are they going to return to childcare? Is childcare going to be there when they return? And if they are attending childcare, they're stressed about, is my childcare going to be able to stay open? Are the teachers going to be able to remain there? Am I safe sending my child to childcare? So, you know, it's those parents are making really difficult decisions right now, and I feel for them. I really do. Staffing is the other huge thing that's going on. It's probably the #1 challenge for our childcare providers. Most of our childcare providers, the staff that work in those locations, are in a high-risk category for one reason or another. And so that is always going to be an issue. So that a lot of those staff are not able to return just because of fear of COVID or some other health concern. Wages is another problem. I mean, we're competing with Chick-fil-A, you know, when you can go work at Chick-fil-A and receive a higher rate than you can caring for our youngest. And that's sad. But I mean, there's, you know, there's some other things going on. You know, we have a real need for school age care right now, with many of our schools either just now returning, or, you know, JCPS has elected not to return just yet. We have all of those school age kids that we don't typically have in care right now, are still needing care and needing assistance with their NTI. So that continues to be a challenge. But I did watch as some of the comments popped up in the chat box about businesses connecting with childcare facilities. And I love that question. I love to see the interest there. And we have continued to work with that. 4C is a local R&R, a resource and referral agency. We've been in business, so we're celebrating our 50th year this year. So happy birthday to us. But we are one of just a handful of R&Rs that continue to exist across the state. And if you're not familiar with your local R&R, I encourage you to find out who it is in your area and connect with them. That is one of the best ways that a community can find out how they can be involved with childcare in their area, find out what's going on, what's really happening in your area, find out what you can do about what's going on in your area, because that's who knows. Those are the people that are boots on the ground. They know what's going on in their area. That is probably one of the things that is the easiest way to find out of what's going on, is connect with your local R&R. But as far as businesses, you know, so many businesses shy away from a childcare option because they think, oh, I have to open a childcare center on property. And that's not it. That is probably not even the best option, truthfully. Although I saw, you know, we have some great examples here in Kentucky. Toyota and some of those we have some really great, and Lexmark I saw pop up in the chat. We have some great examples. And if the company has the funds to do that, that's excellent. However, that's not the only option. We have tons of other options that we could talk about. There's some great tax incentives for businesses to work with their local R&Rs. There are other options. They can look at purchasing slots. They can look at backup care for the times that mom is, you know, needs to be out, or when, you know, the child is sick and just simply needs a backup provider because they can't go to their childcare provider. There's a great network of working with your family childcare providers, because those people, you can support the family childcare provider by purchasing a number of slots through them. That gives them a dedicated income source, and it also gives that facility, you know, a dedicated number of childcare slots that they have available for their childcare. We've done some work with GLI and some of the other chambers, and you cannot attract new talent to Louisville without having childcare for them to send their children to. So, and if we can't attract that talent, then we're not going to be able to attract those businesses. So in order to grow the economy here in Kentucky, we have to be able to attract the talent to be able to staff those businesses. And we have to have a place for them to send their children that it's going to be safe. And that's what they're looking for. So, you know, I encourage you to reach out to your chamber or your local R&R and find out what other ways that a business can, you know, look to work with the local child cares, besides just trying to build a building. That's not always, the brick and mortar is not always what you need to do. And like I said, not even the best. It's not even my go-to. You can start much smaller and you can build in a lot of ways to support childcare and support your employees. That's not just the building. So there's a lot of ways to do that.
Great, thanks. Dawn, Sherry, or anybody else on this topic about business partnerships or the kinds of incentives from anybody's perspective that you'd like to add on to or clarify or ask about?
So I just saw the question pop up about the list of tax incentives, and oh goodness gracious, I am not a tax person. I know enough to be dangerous. So I know there is there are certain tax incentives to work with a local R&R that can help your employees find childcare and realize what high quality childcare is. There are certain incentives about working with other childcare centers, childcare providers, and I'm not exactly sure what all of those are. I could find out for you though. I have people that do know more than I do. So I could find out and get that to you.
Great, thanks, Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
I'll pause here. Does anybody outside of the chat, does anybody want to ask a question of June or Dawn? This great discussion on the business partnerships, by the way. This is a great idea that I think is getting discussed in a variety of circles. I know it's being discussed in some of our discussions with the State Chamber of Commerce about how businesses can be more engaged.
And
I guess,
Perry,
go ahead, June.
yeah, I would just pop in just as a reminder too that business looks really different in our more rural areas of the state. We're really talking about smaller clusters there again. And so looking at, how can we be proactive in terms of recognizing that a company that employs 30 and 40 people still needs childcare, but certainly doesn't have the same potential to help in a way that maybe a company that employs 500. And so I think some of the things we talked about and some of the things we're looking at is, can we grow the family childcare workforce that could really meet the particular needs of a business, like Dawn mentioned, and help support their employees in that way. So it doesn't mean that they're paying for childcare entirely, but maybe there's some amount that they're offsetting that guarantees a spot for a person so that they feel more comfortable about taking that job and about working in that area. So I think just kind of, understanding childcare as an important piece of the infrastructure, whether we're trying to lure in a company that's going to, provide 100 jobs or 20 jobs, childcare is always going to be in need, no matter what the business is.
Harry, I'd love to jump in and see if Sherry would like to maybe share a little bit more of her thinking about systems in place to link small businesses to give them the ability to bid on larger contracts. And that same system being used to provide childcare subsidies.
Okay, well, my older sister worked for years for Washington Mutual Bank in the state of Washington. And one of the things that she did was to provide loans and links to small businesses for them to form a larger entity. So say that you were a business that provided cleaning for companies, and maybe you were only small scale. So you work just locally in your community, but there are these larger contracts that were maybe statewide that you would like to have a part in. What that would do is it would give you access to other cleaning businesses in your area that you could link up with. You guys could form a corporation basically and be able to bid on those larger statewide contracts, not having to leave where you were. So say you provided cleaning in Oldham County, all right? You could maybe link with a cleaning company in Bullitt County or a cleaning company in Spencer County, and then be able to bid on larger scale contracts that incorporated those areas in the state. So a lot of banks have those kinds of agencies now in place, where they're really looking to help diversely owned businesses. They're really looking to help small businesses link up to get these larger contracts. Is there a way maybe to talk to those agencies and see if we can expand that into the childcare arena? My big thing is that, also with the family childcare, is there a way to link these like in-home childcare agencies one to another so they can also support each other and maybe be able to then go to a particular company in their local area and say, hey, we are all together providing childcare. Is there a way maybe you could subsidize what we're doing or the families that we're working with in order to provide care for your employees, so you can make sure they're always going to be at work and that they're not worrying about their children when they're at work, and thereby they're more productive? Anyway, that's, like I said, I don't have lots and lots of details on that, but just kind of my brainstorming, thinking about there's got to be a way to link these things together. And it makes so much more sense, because if you have somebody coming to work who knows their child is being well cared for, they're going to do better work for you. They're not going to be leaving because they're worried about where their child is, or that they have to go home because this isn't being taken care of or that isn't being taken care of. They're a much more relaxed worker. I know when my children were growing up, I knew they were being well cared for and well educated by my amazing grandmother. So, I didn't worry about them. I knew they were cared for. I worked harder. I didn't have to worry if they said, can you stay an extra couple hours? I was able to say, yeah, I can stay an extra couple hours. I know my children are cared for. It just makes sense. So I don't know why we're not really exploring that avenue. And for employers, if they want a more productive worker, what's a better way to do that than to make them feel that their children are cared for?
Yeah, it's a great retention strategy, Sherry.
Absolutely.
And Sherry, I think we're kind of going about it maybe the same but different. So we have, through our pilot project, we have kind of looked at linking those providers together, except linking them together through the employer. So the family childcare providers would be linked through the employer. I guess that employer would be the link. And we've approached several businesses. Jessica Kane is working through that, and I know she's talked to several people, and we have several businesses that are interested. Nobody just wants to be that first one. You know, everybody wants to know, how's it working out for those other people that are doing it? And we don't have that data to share with them to say it's going great over at the such and such company, because nobody's been that first person to commit to doing it. That's kind of what we're looking for, is somebody to jump in and be that first person that could, you know, show them how it's done.
And in our area, we're actually looking at having there's a large nonprofit center in Hazard that has agreed to, in a sense, kind of help sponsor family childcare in the region. So if we can, we've been working on trying to increase the numbers of family childcare providers and increase some interest, and then connect them to the center that could offer some of the services that might be a little more challenging for a person who wants to do a family childcare business. And that would be helping them with what they need to do to track expenses, or helping them with the part about how do I set up what I charge to parents, and how do I, you know, keep track of who's paid and who hasn't, just all those kinds of things that might not be the first thing people think about. And so same kind of thing, our idea is if we can form that network, and family childcare providers can begin to, in a sense, know each other. We can offer some training to them together and feel like they're really a part of supporting the development of their community. That might change how they are seen, how they are considered, and really move forward with what we're trying to do. And I guess a tiny little, you know, bright spot in terms of what COVID has done, certainly by flashing a big, huge light on the fact that childcare is really an issue, we have started to finally see some folks stepping up and saying, you know, tell me more about family childcare. What is it that I need? We just recently helped with 2 folks that got certified. In one county, there had only been one other provider, and in the other county, there were none. There were 0 family childcare providers. And so we're kind of hopeful that we can take those successes, get them talking about it, and encourage some other folks to think about it. And if they feel a part of a community, perhaps that will help in their own, not only their own life of their business, but how they feel about what they're doing and how long they may be able to keep doing it.
If there is any true silver lining to COVID and everything, besides, like somebody mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, not traveling for all of the meetings that we attend to, the other silver lining is that we have drawn a focus to childcare. We have more people looking at it locally and nationally than we probably ever have, or in the time that I've been around. So we have people talking about it. We have some recognition that it's essential, that it's needed, that it is a workforce issue as well as an education issue. And so that is probably one of the best things come out of COVID for childcare. We've had a lot of challenges that come out of that, and that list is very long. But this is probably one of the few successes that has come out of COVID for us.
Well, we're thank you all for all the great questions. We're right at about an hour. We have about 90 seconds left. I'm going to pitch it to Bridget really quickly. But I want to thank June and Dawn again for taking time out of their schedules to join us today for this rich discussion. I think this has been really great. The chat box has been blowing up with lots of great ideas. And we have a lot of work. You'll see in there quickly Helen Carroll and Jessica Kane's email addresses to follow up on some business ideas for those of you that are interested in some more work that we have going on in that area. But thank you all so much, June and Dawn. Thank you. And thank you to everybody that's joined us today. And Bridget, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you, Perry. That was great, everyone. So just a quick reminder, if you're not already connected to the Pritchard Committee's work and want to be more involved, there's a link in the chat box to join the Groundswell, which is our effort to bring as many folks into a big push for Kentucky's continued progress with education at the core as possible. So if you're not already connected, please do so if you're interested. And then also just want to mention again the survey. So many great ideas again in the chat box and in this conversation. please take a few minutes, if you're so inclined, to fill out our survey, which will help us design our strategic plan for the next few years with some of these ideas front and center in that plan. And lastly, I just want to echo Perry's thanks to June and Dawn, and my own thank you to Perry for moderating. And even virtually, we can offer a round of applause. So I'd encourage everybody to say thanks to our speakers and to each of you for being with us today. We know it takes a commitment of time, and we're very grateful for your gift of your time this afternoon. We hope to see you tomorrow and throughout the rest of the week as we continue to engage in conversations about how Kentucky moves toward a big, bold future. So thank you all and have a wonderful afternoon.